What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Swingman podcast. It's podcast number 140. Today, we're going to be running through some trades that we think need to happen within the NBA. Obviously, trade rumors get thrown about the gaff all around this time of year. But before we dive into our trade selections and who we think should be traded, I'm going to ask the chaps, as always, how are you both doing? How you doing, Lewis? How you doing, Louis?
Yeah, not bad. We've obviously had a couple of things happen in the NBA very recently, which we're going to talk about before we get into the trades. So it's around that time where things start heating up. Some of these start going through. Maybe some teams start making certain decisions. One that, as I alluded to, we'll definitely get into. So it's exciting times in the NBA.
Louis, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm all right. It's cold here. We'll be going to a location that's even colder very time. Quite close soon, but yeah, I'm okay. I like what this says. I've enjoyed the trade conjecture this time around. It feels like a lot of the time it's a lot of teams probably trying to talk themselves into something, but it feels like there's quite a few that are sort of pursuing players aggressively this time around. You know, Pascal Siakam obviously went to the Pacers last week, which we haven't had a chance to talk about, but that was one they didn't need to make that trade, did they? You could say that the Pacers aren't really at that level. They don't need to win now, but they did it anyway because, you know, I feel like teams are trying to pursue something. It probably helps a little bit that the NBA draft this year isn't as good. But yeah, I've enjoyed it because there's quite a few teams that are in the position of like, shit, we're quite bad. What do we do? And quite a few teams that are like, we could make a run at a championship. So it's a nice balance, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, like we just touched on a moment ago, there has been some sort of breaking news at this point now that obviously Adrian Griffin has been fired as the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. First year coach, only got 43 games in the stint, very early normally for a firing, I would say, within the NBA, especially for 30-13. I know they had their issues defensively. They had a big change in the offseason, obviously with Dame coming in over Drew Holiday. Do you both think this is the right call or not?
Do you want to go first?
I know. You've got a bit strong feelings about this.
Yeah, no, I think it was. I feel like the team is successful with their record in spite of the coaching, if I'm quite honest. I think it's largely due down to Giannis's brilliance, and also I think Dame, though he's been kind of up and down, and obviously he hasn't been good defensively, but I think in the first couple of months of the season, and even recently, he has won them games when they've got close. He has hit big shots. And those games shouldn't have even been close. There was a game, I think, against Sacramento earlier this month where he hit like a half court or like from the logo 3-pointer in overtime to win that game. So he's kind of filling his part to a certain extent. I think he does need to go like get more consistency, but the writing was on the wall, really. I feel like they've had a couple sort of articles or team meetings or such where they've been discussing the defensive scheme, which they've not been happy about. Particularly, I can remember after the in-season tournament game against the Pacers where there was a big team meeting. Since then, I think an article came out today where it said Adrian Griffin challenged the players a little bit, said they needed more commitment. Never going to go well, I guess, 3 months into your tenure when you're saying that. And he obviously just didn't have the players on board, and particularly he didn't have Giannis on board. And also, I believe Terry Stotts was assistant coach there, who was obviously coaching Dame in Portland. Somehow like left right before the season, kind of under dubious circumstances, not killed or anything, just he left. But yeah, it seemed like it was never really a great fit. He didn't have the players on side, wasn't experienced. Defensive scheme was poor. Their rebounding percentage is really, really bad because Bobby Portis and Giannis are often the sort of point of an offense to defensive players now. So they're coming out. So it leaves Brook Lopez basically rebounding on his own. I think they're like 20th in contested rebound percentage, which is really, really poor for a team that has Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, and Giannis probably starting. So, yeah, I think they have upgraded in the coaching department. No, I'm not a massive fan of Doc Rivers, and I find it ironic that they have replaced Budenholzer, who was criticised for his lack of adjustments in the playoff, and they brought in Doc Rivers, who I think can be criticised the same. But they have to maximize the opportunity that they have here. They have to keep Giannis happy, which he clearly wasn't. So it was the only call to make, basically. There was no other option, I don't think.
Yeah, I think the main thing with it is how early into his tenure that they have decided to let him go, because that coupled with the fact that they have a good record, they have a great record, they're second in the East, and there's some growing pains with Dame. I thought that would probably be enough to give him a bit more leeway. But as you say, I think the one thing people, especially at the start, but even now, think when they think about the Bucks at the moment, is they do have a big weakness with their defense. And I do agree. I think that is still a problem for them. And I didn't have the confidence. I don't have the confidence in them this season over someone like, well, basically the Celtics really is what we're talking about here. I wouldn't have confidence that they'd be able to take them out in the playoffs. But I do think there's definitely going to be an adjustment period because when you think about that Bucks team before, their main real identity, other than just having, the minimum top 3 player in the NBA on their team, is they were a very defensive side. You look to Brook Lopez, Giannis, Drew Holiday. These are all some of the best defenders of their position in the league. Now, when you shift from a Drew to a Dame, you are changing that dynamic of your team. You've obviously still got a decent defensive core in a lot of areas, and that's why I think people were so shocked, even though they added Dame, of how poor they had been defensively this year. But because you bring in Dame, you kind of shift that, not narrative, but like ethos of what your team's about, and you move away from being, considered the almost number one stout defensive team in the league, and you go to more of like this mixture of defense and offense with Dame supercharging that. And that does take time for those kind of things, to that environment to shift. So I was surprised they did it this early, to be honest. But at the same time, I think we all agree there was glaring weaknesses in that team, especially at the start.
It's a tough one. If it's bringing it in for Doc Rivers, it's going to be an interesting one in terms of
he's been hired.
Is it full time? Is it confirmed?
I think so.
I thought it was.
I don't know if it's official, but it's one of those ones where per sources and you trust it pretty well.
Yeah. So I know obviously the Doc Rivers one was either across the line now, or is pretty much you just waiting to sort of cross the T's and dot the I's. But I think he's a respected coach within the league. But considering what you've seen him do in the past few years now within the Eastern Conference, is that the right move? I suspect again they'll have consulted Giannis or Lillard, or potentially not, because they didn't do that with Giannis when they brought Lillard on board. So it's an interesting space for it. But we'll talk about that at another time. We'll dive in. This is a trade podcast. I know we're 8 minutes in here, and this is the first mention of trades that we're talking about. But we basically wanted to sit down and run through some trades that we think need to happen for players and teams now, and kind of to get ahead of the curve, almost try and get in front of other teams that are going to snag these players up. Obviously, we've seen a few already happen. Terry Rozier's in Miami for Kyle Lowry and 1 first-round pick, I do believe it was. Was it 1? So, I think that was an excellent trade. You've seen Siakam move over into Indiana. Expensive, I think, for what they gave up for him, considering I'm not sure how much of a market there was for him, especially with his contract expiring. But obviously there must be some sort of guarantees in place that he's going to sign in Indiana full term. I think they're probably the only team that are going to give him that max contract, and that's a big thing for Siakam. So trades have happened. Let's talk about some trades as well that we think we should make. Now, in doing this, I will pull up our trusty fanspo. We've used this before on the podcast when we're looking at making some trades, and we're going to use it again. So let me make sure that I've got the right overlay for this. And now we'll add this in, and bish bash bosh, we're right there. So who wants to take? I'm going to throw it out to you two first. Who wants to take the honours and go first with their trade and really reveal themselves of where they should go? I want the narrative. I want everything.
I'd like to go first just because I want to get this one out of the way, because I feel like this is the one. This is the generic one that everyone has kind of been talking about for a while now, and it's the DeJounte Murray Lakers trade. Whether you think it's a great fit or not, I think this is probably the one that's going to happen more likely when it comes to a marquee player. It is a 3-team, because all the 2-team ones I don't think are particularly great, and I still think this one's dodgy, but I think it's the best the Lakers going to get, whilst also being feasible. Whether I think it will happen or not, I think at least it could. So the Lakers get DeJounte Murray and Bogdan Bogdanovic. And I do quite like that, because I do think the two main things the Lakers need is one, that sort of defensive, especially in guard, identity, but at the same time they need shooting. They really need shooting. So this kind of addresses both of that. I know Bogdanovic hasn't had the greatest year shooting, but you would generally say he's pretty reliable, and you'd think he'd be able to fill that role. So you got both of them in?
Yeah.
All right. So the Brooklyn Nets are the third team in this. I'll do them first.
Okay.
Because I think the dodgy one's the Hawks part, to be honest. So.
Am I blind? Am I going blind here? I am going blind.
Yeah, it's underneath where you are, one up, one down.
That's why I'm sitting there thinking it's. I was guessing everything. Then right there we go.
Okay, right. So the Nets get D'Angelo Russell, which I feel like is one that kind of has to go when it comes to this DeJounte Murray trade.
I kind of like that though. I like D'Lo.
Yeah, it's like the whole D'Lo back in Brooklyn where he got his All-Star. So it says him, Christian Wood.
Christian Wood. Wow. Okay. Right.
Yeah. And then a 2025 second round pick for them.
Yep.
Right, and then the Hawks obviously are the last team involved.
Yep.
And this one is Gabe Vincent.
The ever-present Gabe Vincent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, no one really cares about that at this point.
Yeah.
Dorian Finney-Smith, which is a nice player for the Hawks to get, I think. Helps us with their defense a decent bit.
Yeah.
Jalen Hood-Schifino. To be honest, I don't really know much about him. So
right.
Taurean Prince, which I think is another nice player for the Hawks to get. The problem is obviously these aren't up to the level of what they're giving up, so it does have to be some picks. And this only has, and this is the issue, I think. And I said this before, when it comes down to these types of trades, it's always just how many picks are they giving up. And this one has the Lakers 2029 first round pick and a 2024 second round pick via the Clippers.
So the Hawks are only going to get a first and a second in this.
So this is what I mean. So it's how much, basically the two things in this are how much you value Dorian Finney-Smith, because I do think he's obviously a good NBA player, but is it enough along with the picks to give up? I think he fits a need for the Hawks, but is it enough to give up DeJounte Murray and Bogdanovic? Obviously, the Bogdanovic isn't as important here. And I probably don't think a first and second would be enough, but I will say of the DeJounte Murray trades I've seen, because I don't think it's the best fit in the world for the Lakers. I think it helps them, but I really do think they need some shooting as well. So I think this is the one that gives them the most, but at the same time, yeah. As I said, is it feasible with what the Hawks are getting? I think it is, but I don't think it's amazing for them.
I don't know what DeJounte Murray's value is really. So when he got traded to the Hawks, how many first round picks was that? I'm not even trying to measure it on that barometer.
3 or 4, I think. Yeah.
So first.
Well, I tell you what, if you believe the rumours that the Nets are trying to get 2 first round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith,
I mean, they're not getting 2 first round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith.
I mean, I don't think DeJounte Murray's value is definitely not what it was when he got traded to the Hawks. Let's just say that.
Agreed.
He's in the moment right now where Trae Young's injured, so he's the point guard effectively. He's putting up numbers. I don't think he's the defensive player that he once was. But I still think he's a good solid player and probably a decent sort of pickup for the Lakers, really, because I'm not sure I haven't checked recently, but I know that the Lakers' offensive rating somehow lies in between sort of like 19th and 25th. I can't remember what it is now. So that's not good. You're not going to win a championship with a offensive rating in between that range. I'm sorry. I think this kind of leaves room for them to make another move, which I quite like as well. Yeah, maybe it would work. Maybe the Hawks would demand a little bit more, but I'm not sure how much more they can demand particularly. And the players are going to get in this trade, they're just going to trade away again, really, to another team potentially, who are looking, because at this moment in time, are we kind of suggesting here that the Hawks and the Nets are just packing it in a little bit and blowing it up slightly? I know with the Hawks, it might be a bit different because they'll probably keep Trae. So it's like a half block, but there's a DeJounte Murray extension. Obviously, that kind of factors into things here. I'm not sure about Bogdanovic's contract situation either, but yeah.
I think in terms of how I'm seeing this here, I still think the Hawks would need maybe swap that second for a first is where I think it would lean on. I think they'd need 2 firsts for what they're giving up, because ultimately,
Yeah.
I don't think Torian Finney-Smith is holding that much value for them. Gabe Vincent's on a lot of money for someone that's had a lot of injury issues, not just this season, but going back a little while too. Granted, he was very good last year, but predominantly he was still he was still an injury-prone player at points there. Taurine Prince is probably the most valuable asset that there is there, and he's on an expiring contract and is going to get paid more than likely. So from that aspect, on the Hawk side of things, I think if you swap it to a first from that second, they're looking good. On the Nets side of things, I think this is quite good for them on the premise
I
that
don't hate the Nets one.
I think Christian Wood will work there as another sort of backup stretch big that they've got. And D'Lo will do well because they're going to move Spencer Dinwiddie. I'd be pretty surprised if he is in Brooklyn come the end of the trade deadline. So I think him coming in, I think they're going to try and keep Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson. I don't think they're going to necessarily be a selling team. So D'Lo working alongside Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, they might be able to form sort of down that back end of the stretch of the season where people aren't really expecting the Nets to do much. They'll probably have some nice wins and put up some good scores and good numbers. And then in the new year, you can then sit down and assess what you're going to do with your roster, what's happening with Ben Simmons, and a few other things. So I don't hate it for them. Overall, I think this will be, it's something that the Lakers need more than the other two. And that's where I feel the issues lie. But once that gets resolved, I can see this happening in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, the main conversation I wanted to have around this and the DeJounte Murray to Lakers thing in general is, I personally think if they are going to move for him, they need to also move for someone to get a bit more shooting, whether it's in the trade itself, like included with him, or doing another move after it. I just think that has to happen as well, because I just don't think, especially when you consider the fit with LeBron James, I don't think DeJounte Murray and LeBron James are the most conducive players to have on a team. So I think they need more than that, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's this obsession though when it comes to Lakers and they have a bad season. Like the trade talk start immediately, and maybe it's a LeBron team thing as well. But I do think they're misusing the players that they have on the team right now. If I'm quite honest, I think there's some good players on that team. They've shown it in other situations. I just don't think a LeBron James team should be that low in offensive rating. Personally, I think that may be something to be said of him as well, which is fair enough. You know, he's quite a bit older now. But I just don't think they're using their players that they currently have well enough. So, yeah, this move would make them better. But I do think there's also something to be said about the coaching situation there, which has been talked about already. So I won't go into it further.
Indeed. Right, we'll move on. I'm going to throw a trade up on the board. We did spend quite a lot of time on that one. And I'm going to move on. I'm going to go through mine a little bit quicker because I think this one sort of is, it's one of those players that has been in the rumor mill, shall we say. And I'm going to throw it on screen right now. I'm not going to build it because I've already pre-done it. Here's one I made earlier, shall we say. And it's this. Surprise. It's Bruce Brown to the Timberwolves. So I think Bruce Brown is a very common spoken asset that's been going around at the moment. Obviously, we don't expect him to land in Toronto and stay there past the trade deadline. I think he will be moved on again. And as such, he's going to be one of those players that contending teams seriously for a title this year will be looking at. Obviously, exceptional season with Denver, a lot of experience that are coming in here. And the reason I've gone the Timberwolves route is because obviously they've been, apart from the little hiccup with Cat dropping 60 and still losing to the that disgusting performance, as Chris Finch called it, they still have, they're in a win now window, essentially. I know obviously Anthony Edwards is a very young player, but when they've got this season, you don't know how long these things are going to last for. So sometimes you need to sort of make a move and try and optimize your window. Bruce Brown is someone I think that would come into this team landing straight away into sort of the work ethic that they've got there. He adds that experience of already winning a chip, which fundamentally is lacking in that Timberwolves thing. And that's something that's going to be one of the, when you talk about this in the playoffs, this is going to be one of the things people speak about with the Timberwolves is that they won't do it. They won't get there. They haven't got the experience. Bruce Brown will add that in that capacity. From the Raptors side of things, and to make the trade work, to be frank, they're getting Kyle Anderson, who I don't think out of the sort of fringe bigs that they've got at Minnesota, I think Naz Reid is more sort of valued than Kyle Anderson is. And I think Kyle Anderson's still a good player, but he's on an expiring contract, which is beneficial for the Raptors looking for that rebuild in the new year. Shake Milton is just there for salary cap and space, and so is Josh Minott. The issue I had was if it's 2 second rounds or a first round and a second round is how I'd value this. because I think the cap space that they're getting on the Carl Anderson deal is actually quite valuable for Toronto. So it then leads into, is there a better offer, do you think, out there than this for Bruce Brown?
So the couple of things I'd say about it is I don't think anyone's going to give up 2 firsts for Bruce Brown. So
I don't think
I
give
think-
up 2 firsts. It was
I think-
2 seconds or a first and a second was where I was deliberating.
Yeah, so I wouldn't worry about the first or the second. And then the first itself, I do think, and I think the rumours that have been circling around is that the Raptors are looking for a first and a young player. So whilst I think this trade is decent either way, I think the problem it'd counter is I think other teams would be or could be willing to put forward a first and a player that's more attractive than this. It's just whether the Raptors would value a second round pick and just maybe a half decent player like you said, like Carl Anderson, or they'd take that young player. Because another one that I had written down, I'll just say now because it's not one that you really have to visualize, would be it was the Lakers again, and this doesn't help their shooting, but they could potentially move for a Bruce Brown, and that would be probably like a first and Rui. And I think the Raptors would have to ask themselves, would they like a young player like Rui over, say, something like this, where it'd be a second and a decent player alongside?
Yeah, I think Bruce will have some suitors, particularly because that's only a 1-year contract, right? So, or a 2? Is it a 2-year? I think it might be a team option the second year. So that's obviously favourable. And like you said, he's like an adult in the room, which the Timberwolves need, clearly. You get to half time of a game where Cat's doing well and they're focusing on getting in more points than Joel Embiid than getting the win, which is why that was a really telling press conference, actually, I thought. Telling on the type of things that is wrong with Karl Anthony Towns, despite his talent and his sort of unique player profile anyway. Part of me feels like that might be a bit too much for Bruce Brown. I know he's a good player. I feel like that's all the Timberwolves have to offer, though. So, there's that aspect to it. Like with the salaries anyway, there's not really anyone else that I would say that's that expendable. I feel like more so for Timberwolves, I'm fighting between whether they need like an experienced player like Bruce Brown, like you said, who brings the sort of defensive intensity, can hit a 3-pointer. But I also really think they need a point guard, either a backup point guard for Mike Conley when he's not there, or someone to effectively replace him in that same mold where he's an adult in the room. Obviously, like distributing rather than scoring type of thing. Tyus Jones is obviously someone who's been at the Timberwolves at a previous time. I don't know how the salaries would work on that front, and I know he'd want to get paid next summer, which makes it a little bit difficult as well. So I don't mind this personally, but I think Bruce Brown will be traded because there's no real value in the Raptors keeping him, I don't think. I just don't think it's this one personally, but I'm not sure which one it will be.
Yeah, as you say, the Timberwolves one, I think the 2 avenues they really go when it comes to the guard position is something like this, or as you say, literal like you trade Mike Conley and maybe a pick for someone. And I think the one
I wouldn't trade Mike Conley. I wouldn't someone in spite of Mike Conley.
Okay, yeah. I've seen a potential Brogdon trade floating around, and that would have Mike Conley in it. So
no, I wouldn't do that.
That'd be the other side of it. I don't think they'd do that, but that would be the other option, I think, instead of something like this.
Indeed. Right, we'll move on then. Louis, share us a trade. Come on, what have you got cooking up there?
Let's go for. I mean, I know this is never going to happen, but I found it quite.
But that's why we like.
That's how we always start.
I've got like 7 or 8, so I'm trying to decide which one to go for. Let's go for one for the Sacramento Kings. Kings here, and it's going to involve the Washington Wizards as well.
The damn Washington Wizards. Okay.
So I've got Kyle Kuzma going to the Sacramento Kings.
Okay.
Coming back, you got Harrison Barnes, Davion Mitchell, Colby Jones, a 2026 first round pick, and a 2028 first round pick. Now, maybe that's too much. Fair enough, but it's also protected as well. I'm not sure if you can have that on Fanspo, that type of thing. But yeah, let's see if that works. Well, it does. So, I mean, talking behind my thinking about this. I had a few Kings ones, if I'm quite honest, because I looked at this more from a team perspective than a player perspective more than anything else, because I just think the Kings do need to make a move. They're good, but they're not very good. And I think, though even if they made this trade, I'm not picking them over the Nuggets or anything like that, but it puts them into a stratosphere of the Western Conference where things are a little bit uncertain. We'd say, I think, at this moment in time, and I dread to say this, my second favorite in the Western Conference is the Los Angeles Clippers. So you're like, when it's come into that type of perspective where Kawhi, Paul George, or James Harden all have fitness concerns, you can put yourself into that little window. And I think they just have to maximize what they have really with the Aaron Fox and Sabonis, considering they traded for Sabonis, they've extended him. They've kind of gone all in on this. And I just don't think the team currently, as it's constructed, is good enough. I think they need a bit more scoring. They're a bit too reliant on Keegan Murray. And obviously Kyle Kuzma provides a scoring flair. Maybe he would like more touches than some being on this team would give him. But I think he could assimilate quite easily. He plays good defense as well, which is something they need in Sacramento, which they're probably not really, they're short of really, if we're quite honest. And the players they're giving up there, Sacramento, I don't think would affect them too much. Harrison Barnes is obviously on a lot of money and he's been quite pivotal for them, but he's not super reliable, if we're quite honest. Going back to the finals for the Golden State Warriors, David Mitchell's been a pretty much non-factor, and I'm sorry, I don't really know about Colby Jones that much. What you would maybe say is 2 first-round picks might be a lot to give up for Kyle Kuzma. But I do think, I've got my issues with Kyle Kuzma, but I do think he is a good player in the right scenario, and obviously the Washington Wizards isn't that. And the Wizards need draft capital, don't they? Let's be honest. They're in that situation.
I don't hate this. I don't hate this at all. Harrison Barnes is a good player in his day, but he's very inconsistent. Is the man with Harrison Barnes? I've already seen multiple times this year where he just gets benched for way longer than would be expected in games if he's not playing well in any case. So I don't think the Kings would have any trouble moving him on, and I also don't think the Wizards would have trouble finding a suitor for him. Maybe not immediately, but in the summer, I think they could move him on as well. I don't think 2 firsts is out of the question for Kuzma. I think his numbers have been that good this year. I know it's the Wizards and he's getting the majority of the touches, but I also think he's shown a mental attitude, like the way he's approached this season as well, because he could have got into this like Jordan Poole pretty much has done and not give a shit about anything for the whole year. And he hasn't done that necessarily, I'd say. So I think he adds something, a different dimension than Harrison Barnes would do. And yeah, it does put the Kings within that contention window, like you said.
Yeah, I do think 2 first does feel like quite a lot for Kuzma, but I do like Harrison Barnes. I do think he's a good player, but I think when you're looking at what the Kings could do, personally, I think the premier player that you could trade for in this position is Lauri Markkanen. But after him, I think you then
the Jazz would let him go.
No shot.
For a lot, which is the issue. And that's what I'm saying when I say after that, you're then probably looking at Kuzma and thinking about what you would have to give up for Lowry. Maybe then when you look at this and you look at the 2 firsts, you think, okay, for what's available and for what we'd have to give up, maybe this is the best thing we could get, because he would 100% make the Kings better. Would he get them over the line? I don't know. I think the good thing is, as Louis said, outside of the Nuggets, there is quite a lot of variance with those Western teams and which way they could go with obviously your young Thunder team, your Clippers team that are obviously playing well, but, they're always an injury worry and a capitulation worry in the playoffs. So you can sort of see a team rising out of that. And then obviously you've got the Timberwolves where they are playing very well, but everyone's got questions on Rudy Gobert every year in the postseason. So I do think it's a move that I could see them making, but it does feel like quite a lot to pay. But when you consider the position and the alternatives, maybe it was something that you would have to do.
I would say, just to add on this as well, the Kings were quite active and aggressive in trade talks for both Siakam and OG Anunoby. So they're obviously looking in this type of position and for that type of quality, that defensive, I guess, forward who can give us a few buckets every now and then. So they're obviously shopping in this direction. They know this is something that they need to kind of fill. So it's just something to bear in mind. But there are other players, like you mentioned. Who is it you mentioned again? That I said then Markkanen. I think Markkanen's probably untouchable for the Jazz. Personally,
I think Markkanen's untouchable.
and then you got there's other players that maybe I'll mention in my next trade, so I won't do. But there are forwards in this range that I think are probably in that sort of bucket. So it's not just Kuzma there.
For sure. Right, I'm going to throw up another trade.
If we're doing the forwards, and Louis got a couple of others, do you want to carry on?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got it there, let's do it.
It's only, you know what? I feel like this one was more viable, so I'm just going to go one that's never gonna happen for reasons you'll find obvious in the end. I feel like. So this one involves the Golden State Warriors and the Portland Trail Blazers.
Okay. Right. Well, this is interesting. I have a Golden State Warriors and Trailblazers trade.
Maybe I don't think we do. I don't think this will be the same, but we'll see. So
I have it already made, so I'll throw it up immediately after. So
okay, in this scenario, the forward that I was mentioning, one who would be the top of my list, even above Kyle Kuzma, would be going to Golden State, or it'd be Jeremy Grant, who I also looked at trying to get to the Sixers as well, because I think he'd be really, really good there. They would also be getting Malcolm Brogdon, who we mentioned as well previously, got some injury concerns, but we'll see with this one. So coming back will be Klay Thompson. So this is why it's never going to happen. Klay Thompson and Moses Moody, who is, we would say at this moment in time, completely pretty much out of the rotation at the Warriors. So let me get it up again so I remember what picks were given here. So the Trailblazers would be getting a 2026 round 1 pick.
Yeah.
A 2028 round 1 pick.
Yeah.
And they would also get a 2028 round 2, which would be via Atlanta. Okay. So 2 first rounders and a second.
So do you know what's really interesting? So that's the trade on screen right now of what you made. This is the trade on screen that I made. So I had Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins going the other way.
Interesting. All right. Okay. All right.
So we're along the same lines here. I made this on the premise I don't think they're getting rid of Klay, and I can very much see them getting rid of Andrew Wiggins and Chris Paul, which has been a fundamental error. Which is you can only ways you can describe. I would say that trade. Yeah,
well, I mean, I don't mind the Chris Paul as much. I think we're at the point with Wiggins where you're going to have to attach some assets, right, to get rid of him. Are we agreed on that? You're going to kind of have to give some picks away to get rid of Wiggins. I think personally.
I think personally, I saw both of these trades actually. I'm pretty sure. Obviously, the Klay ones you say they're just not going to trade Klay, and I'm not even sure. I'm not sure the Trailblazers would do either of these. I think with the other one, Chris Paul and Wiggins, I do think their trade value is at the point where they're not. You might not even consider them a net positive at this point. As Louis said, you may have to.
What you think Andrew Wiggins is that bad value?
Yeah.
Well, it's not. It's partly that.
I think he's their only sort of commodable asset.
It's the contract. It is not the contract. The contract itself. No, I think it's the same old. It should feel like it's been the same old story with the Warriors, where it's like Moody and Kuminga are basically what they're going to give up for certain people, unless you do something like this. But as I said, I just don't think Chris Paul and Wiggins have that sort of value where teams are actively going to look to try and trade for them. So you do have to make it very generous with the picks.
My rationale behind this basically was I don't think Andrew Wiggins, I don't think he's an all-time, let's be real, he's not at a high trade value in what he's at right now. But I don't rate him as badly as it seems you two do. I know he's had a bad season. But he's still coming on the contract.
It's him and the contracts together. That's the problem. I'm not saying he's a bad player. I just think his trade value is quite low for him at the moment, and his contract's very bad.
So I'll counter that with Jeremy Grant's on a bad contract. Let's be frank about this as well. He's not a max money player.
Yeah, but his trade value is much.
His trade value
is better than Wiggins.
Yes,
he's a better player than Wiggins.
Yeah, but when you put this into the perspective how I saw this, right, the Blazers are in a full-blown rebuild. The way I see how you've got their sort of roster where they've got Scoot, they've got Shaden, and they've got Anthony Simons. You're getting one of the best point guards ever to play in the NBA as a tutelage section for them.
Yeah.
I think the intrinsic value on that would be beneficial. I don't think that's something you can also overlook. That isn't something that wouldn't be a factor because it is an inbuilt factor for this. I think you couple that with Wiggins, who, let's be frank, if he does have a good year next year, rewrites the narrative of what he's had again, because that's all it will take is a good year. And if he's in Portland and he's going to be the guy alongside a Chris Paul who can distribute the ball, I don't think it's bad at all. With 2 firsts and a second, I think it works.
I personally, I think when it comes, obviously, as you say, having a veteran guard around those players is nice. They just don't need any more guards, I think, is the main issue there. And we spoke about Wiggins before. And I think the other issue is if I was to try and look for trades for these two individually, Jeremy Grant and Brogdon, that is, I think you come back with a lot better than what you're getting here, but trading them both together.
Potentially. I just don't know why the Trailblazers would say no, really. I don't know what they're saying no to here, because we know where the Trailblazers are. They're just sort of accumulating assets. They accumulate in the draft capital, and they'll try and sell it off, but they are kind of stuck with a couple guys, I feel, at the moment. Like Ayton, I don't think anyone's touching. So they might be a bit wary of taking on someone like Wiggins, who we can debate his trade value anyway, in any case. But when the Timberwolves traded Andrew Wiggins to the Golden State Warriors, they had to attach a first-round pick to get rid of him. And he is playing the exact same way now. So I don't see why it would be any different personally. He obviously has that history. He swung the finals for them, if I'm being fair. And he won them a championship, so that's good. But you can't pay people or acquire people based on what they have done. It's what you think they're going to do, and I don't think a scenario where he is the main man helps him particularly. Actually, I think he is better in the scenario where he can hide slightly. Obviously, not going too well here, but that's generally where I think he is better.
And as I said before, I think you would get if you were to do 2 individual trades for Jeremy Grant and Brogdon, if you could find them, I think you'd get a first in both of them. And then after that, I'd look to what players are they going to bring in alongside it. And I think there are a lot of players that they could get from teams that would benefit them more than Wiggins and Chris Paul would.
But would you say that'd be good for the Warriors, though, wouldn't it? I mean, bringing in Jeremy Grant is exactly what I feel like they need. Brogdon is obviously a bit of a shot in the arm, maybe an improvement on Chris Paul at this moment in time. I think he'd be coming off the bench largely, but he'll be good in that role. I feel like obviously there's the injury concerns with kind of both of these players actually, but
I think it also provides some cover for if Clay doesn't then suddenly turn it on towards the back end of the season.
He's not going to. He's done.
I don't think so.
Do you think he's done?
He's not. I don't think he's finished, but he's not going to be.
He's not going to be
the player that he was ever again.
No. Yeah. He's
well. In any case, Brogdon still is a very good piece and will help the Warriors in that bid to try and win still this year, which is what ultimately we're saying they're going to be doing by making this sort of trade, is where I'm at.
Yeah, well,
we've probably got time. We've probably got time for 2 more trades. So do you want to... I mean, I'll throw one up on the screen as well because I had a Brogdon one already prepared. I'm not going to include this. This was a Philly trade on the basis that they're giving up. This was the issue I had with how much sort of draft capital to attach to this. DeAnthony Melton is a good player. He's on an expiring contract as well. But the capital that they're going to get, and this is the thing, when we're saying about what they would get for Brogdon and Grant in individual trades outside of that, I don't think Grant's going to get too much on the open market within a trade. That contract is bad. He's a good player, but it's a bad contract. So I don't think his value is going to be that mad. Brogdon is the better asset piece there in that side of things. Oh. This for Philly allows them to bring in a guard that will come alongside Maxey, provide some cover in some other scenarios as well, and gets them a little bit better. And then if it doesn't work out, they're not really tied into someone on a long contract paying them a lot of money. Brogdon will have a year left. So it gives them a little bit more flexibility. It means that they can also try this year again, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and they can reevaluate. This is how I saw this sort of playing out again for potential suitors. And granted, like you said, I think there might be some more value for Brogdon, but I think a first 2 seconds and 2 expiring contracts is pretty good.
I think so as well.
Yeah, I think it's decent. I actually looked at a lot of the potential suitors for Philly in sort of the Brogdon kind of range of player. And I think the issue I always came to is the players that they could be trading for were all players that fit on a lot of teams. And when it came down to what Philly could give up, I just think a lot of the time they're going to get bid for them, so they're basically going to have to overpay for any of this sort of player. And I think this is an attractive deal. I just worry I think there's better deals out there that the Trailblazers could go get, and I think a lot of teams will be in for problem.
I would struggle to find. I would be amazed if I see a deal that's more attractive than 26 mil in cap space, 2 seconds, and a first round pick for Brogdon. I think that's very, very
And I think a lot of the time, this is when I say overpay. This is what I mean, because I think a lot of the time when you see the proposed Philly trades, they're usually one of these contracts, like a Korkmaz or something, and a first and a second. And I think those types of trades are the ones that are not going to be enough for a player like Brogdon, considering who's going to be in for him. So you do have to do something like this. I don't hate it, as you say. But I think this also goes to show what I was talking about before. Yeah, I know you said, even if you think Jeremy Grant's the better player out of the two, he is on that contract, so it's going to probably be harder to move him. Look at what they're getting for Brogdon here that we think is about right, and then think Jeremy Grant's probably going to get a first at least. It's going to be better than that Warriors trade.
I really don't value Jeremy Grant at even a first round on that contract. He's a great player, but I don't.
They will 100% get a first for him. No way they don't get a first.
I think he'd be really good for Philly as well, because he follows that template. I mean, say to this right now, Joel Embiid got 70 points the other night. Tyrese Maxey's a really good guard. Do either of you think that Philadelphia 76ers have a chance of winning the championship? Because I don't.
Well, they have a chance. They definitely have a chance.
Do you know what?
Well, you can say that about anyone, but really, do you think they actually could? Because I don't. There's like 4 teams I put above Philly. 3 teams, I would say, actually, if I'm being generous.
I would put 100%. Obviously, everyone thinks Celtics can go to the finals.
I think the Celtics are.
I will say. Yeah, but I am, even though I still think the Bucks would probably win, I am more confident in a Philly Bucks matchup now than I would have been at the start of the season.
That's fair enough. It might be close. I still would pick the Bucks, and I think I'd pick the Heat over them personally as well. I think if they got Jeremy Grant, it follows the template that the Nuggets have of, Jokic, Murray, and then you got Aaron Gordon, who's kind of a swing guy, who's like the third best guy on the team, but he's good defensively. He can score, whereas Jeremy Grant can do that as well. I think he's got the athletic ability. He's a great defensive
Do you think
player.
Jeremy
He's
Grant
had a couple of years of isolation scoring as well for the Pistons and the Blazers. Not to a very good standard, but yeah.
Do you think Jeremy Grant works with Tobias Harris, or are you saying Tobias Harris is out at that point?
No, I think he works with Tobias Harris. I think you could keep Tobias Harris and get him.
Okay,
I think you can. I think if you just do Korkmaz here and the same picks or whatever, maybe switch the picks around. I think the salaries match might be wrong. But
I think if you keep Tobias Harris and get another guard is where I would say that's how I would rank with Philly at the minute.
I think
someone like a more experienced one is where I'd lean.
I think Tobias Harris can be upgraded, but I think Jeremy Grant would definitely be an upgrade on Tobias Harris, 100%. To me, that's very clear, actually.
In this, in previous seasons, trust me, and we know how we've spoken about Philly, I'd 100% agree with you. But in this role that he's been given with Nick Nurse, it has been a little bit different, is what I'd say. He has been better. He's been asked to do more, and he has delivered 9 times out of 10. So, but granted, it's the playoffs; it's a different scenario. So we won't get bogged down with that. We'll do one more trade. What one of you thinks you've got the spiciest one? Let's see the spiciest trade that you've got.
Lewis has one left. I've given 2.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's the absolute opposite of spicy, though. It's potentially one of the driest trades I could have come across. But I think it serves a need. So we'll do it.
We'll have a look. We'll run through this one quickly then.
It's the Magic and the Spurs. And
that's Magic, not spicy, is it?
Yeah, exactly. This is what I mean. Unless they're getting I'm only going to go to it. The Magic would be getting Doug McDermott.
Oh, big Doug, right.
And Keldon Johnson.
Right.
And Spurs would be getting Wendell Carter Jr. and Markel Fultz on these expiring contracts. So as I said, very dry trade. But
there's no way this happens.
I just thought this was just one I saw floating around. And I thought, it's a lot of the time when I look at these trades, it's just something for topics of conversation, basically. And the Magic recently they started off very hot. They have not been as hot. And one of the big issues they've got at the moment, I talked about the Lakers 3-point shooting. The Magic's 3-point shooting is absolutely terrible. I think they're very low on both threes made, and it's either threes attempted or threes made. It's probably both because they kind of go hand in hand. and 3-point percentage. So they need to I think they need to bring someone in to help them out with that. And obviously Doug McDermott, I think he's shooting like 41% or something this year. So that would be a great help to them. Keldon Johnson as well. He's like an average 3-point shooter, but he is a very decent player. So I think he'd be a good addition to them. And what they're giving up, obviously the expiring contract is attractive to the Spurs. I don't think, faults. I think everyone's out of faults at this point. And Wendell Carter Jr., I think, has been promising at times. And I think he'd be someone that the Spurs would be willing to take a risk on. It's some cover for Wemby as well. Helps him out. Maybe not having to play that centre position. So, as I said, it's a pretty dry trade, but I do think it's one I could see happening because it fills a need on both, especially on the Magic side. But the Spurs, I think it's decent for them as well.
I really don't see the Magic doing that. I don't think they're as down on Markel Fultz as you think they are. He's just coming back from that injury timeline that he's had. I know he's always going to have those lingering concerns. He's not going to get paid $17 million a year, but I think he's got a bit more value than a Keldon Johnson or Doug McDermott. And so especially does Wendell Carter Jr. Wendell Carter Jr. on that contract as well is a very good trade piece. I don't think they're going to... Doug McDermott is not. Doug McDermott shoots that well because no one guards him, is the first point. And Keldon Johnson's a great player in one realm, but I don't think this happens in any scenario, personally.
Well, I had a Magic one, which was a bit more spicy, but also probably quite unlikely to happen, and that was it would be a DeJounte Murray one, and it would be the Magic get DeJounte Murray because I think they need a point guard more than anything. I know the 3-point shooting is bad, but I just don't think that they need a guard basically, which has been their thing for a while. And then the Hawks would get Markel Fultz, which you said is an expiring, and it would be 2024 first round pick. Denver's 2025 first round pick. Don't like that particularly anyway. 2026 second round pick, which is the second most favorable from Detroit, Milwaukee, and Orlando. So yeah, I don't think the Orlando Magic will make a trade personally, just because they don't need to. They're on a course right now. They've got a young team. I also thought I saw some Zach LaVine trades here. Don't think I would do it for the $40 million that he's worth, and it's telling that none of us have even come up with a trade for Zach LaVine because he gets so much money, and I just don't think he's worth it. Basically, I thought the only one that I can even conceivably think of is the Lakers and maybe the Sixers, but I wouldn't do it if I was high for them. Maybe
I wouldn't touch LaVine with a 10-foot barge pole if I was.
It's a rough time for Zach LaVine PR as we speak, but. Yeah, there's some. The fact that we're even thinking about the Magic making a go-in trade is telling of how far they've come. But yeah, they need something.
This I like. This for the Magic, I think would be this I like on the premise that you've got Banchero there, you've got Wagner, they've got some nice other guards that you could potentially look at in terms of Cole Anthony Black, the rookie. There's some nice areas for it. DeJounte Murray comes in. They still lack a little bit of shooting for me, is what I would say with Orlando. But I think if you're going to make moves, realistically, this is going to be one of the better ones that you can make. I think maybe, even then, I think the draft capital is probably about right, is what I would attach to this. And then Markel Fultz is, his value's there. He's not going to get paid 17 mil. It's just the injury concerns. When he's played, he's been all right this year. Is the other thing.
Oh, the Fultz benefit is the fact the contract's expiring. There is literally no point in even talking about Fultz as a player. Like it's because the contract's going that I've calculated. Like I don't. There is no value in Markel Fultz other than the contract. I don't know what you're talking about there, really.
The picks aren't.
There definitely is.
Nah, there's not.
No, I don't think
one
so.
cares. They only care about the contracts and the fact that it's the only thing with the Hawks is, I think, unless you have a plan on what you're going to do with that expiring contract and who you're going to get in the offseason.
Sure.
I feel like they want some players. I think they want some players when it comes to DeJounte Murray to actually improve their team. I think that might be the issue with this because they'd still have Trey. And I don't think it's like a blow it up, get some draft capital, and then go from there. I think they'll want some semblance of something back to improve the team, unless, as I said, they really do have a plan sorted out with cap space and picks of what they're doing that offseason. I think that's a hard sell to Trey as well. So I do think they'd want some players in a DeJounte Murray trade.
I mean, the draft capital doesn't have to be used on the actual draft. Like you could then use that for a future trade.
Yeah,
yeah.
But as I say, it's this. Obviously, Trey's going to get consulted in this kind of thing. It's selling that to him and saying like, "This is what we're going to do." But I think it's a tough sell.
I don't know what are you selling him on? What you know what I mean? Like,
I know.
I think Trey Young's going to get out of there at some point. Is what I would say.
Yeah, this would be this. It would be them committing to the trade future, obviously, as well. So
yeah, Trey and Jalen Johnson, the only players I think on the Hawks that are worth keeping.
I don't mind Clint Capella as well, but yeah,
he could get some good value. He's got some good value.
He's got some good value. So
I saw a lot of DeAndre Hunter trades as well, like him included in some stuff for them to maybe move some things.
No, I think there's definitely some interesting times in Atlanta as well in terms of what would be ahead. It'll be on what Trey does in the summer. What happens with DeJounte Murray in this trade window, and then this will be a big decision sort of lever for what Trey Young will do is what I feel in the summer. But we'll wrap that one up there. Thank you very much for listening. If you did enjoy this video podcast, wherever you're watching it on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is, leave us a subscribe if you've got this far. Leave a like on the video. Comment down below. What's your favorite trade? Who you think should be traded and anyone that we missed? But apart from that, we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for listening. Peace.